Hello and welcome to the Into the Unknown podcast with my co-host Scott East and myself, Michael Jeffery, where we explore the edges of modern culture and dream the possibility of a next one. So like always, we're going to start with a little centering exercise. So I invite you just to close down your eyes and notice your breath. Your authentic breath, just how it is now, coming in, going out. Notice how deep it's going, or how shallow, how fast or how slow, how big or how small. And see if you can link that breath with any physical body sensations you're noticing right now. And breathe together with those sensations. And then continuing to hold the awareness of both your breath and the sensations. See if you can notice any emotions that are alive in your being right now. See if you can allow those three to weave together, informing each other, interacting with each other. Then I'd invite you to say out loud this, where you are here right now, your emotions or your body, your breath, or all three. Just take two more final breaths to release any tension you're carrying. Welcome. So today, we're going to explore a topic that sparked Scott's interest last week. And yeah, perhaps you want to tell us a little bit about what's emerging for you there, Scott.
Yeah, thanks. I watched a documentary on Netflix called Explain, and they do these short 25-minute deep dives into a particular topic. And this one was about cults. And I asked Michael if he would be willing to also watch it, and then we could talk about it today. And part of my impulse with it is like, okay, cults are really like alternatives to the mainstream, and a cult is a cult if it's like destructive. That's one way that it's kind of defined in this documentary, and it's come up for me as a really important, like this, there's this urge in me I'm realizing where it's really important for me that in anything that I'm doing where I'm introducing somebody to a new idea or a new perspective, or to be a part of my thing or my workshop or my group, that there's no pulling the wool over their eyes. There's no, stuffing down of their like critical thinking or their questioning ability. And I'm really interested in like watching this documentary, and now I even like downloaded an audiobook that I'm listening to called Combating Cult Mind Control by Steven Hassan, which so far I really recommend for anybody. Yeah, like what are the nuts and bolts of it? What are the nuts and bolts of how a cult works? And and how can we, you, if you're creating something different from the mainstream way of doing things, how can you sort of cult proof it? And how can you become cult proof? And so Michael and I have not talked about this. He just watched it. I watched it like last week. I've watched it a couple times. We haven't talked about it. I haven't heard his impressions of it. And so we'll just be kind of getting the raw cut today. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, just from your initial explanation there of, it sounds like this desire to be cult proof as you're in the process of supporting creation of a different culture. I just wonder if you could say a bit more about that. Like, why is that important to you?
Which part?
Making any endeavor you do to create a new culture to make that cult proof. Why is it important to avoid some of these qualities that cults have?
Yeah, thank you. One thing I'm realizing is that, like, as humans, we're not born cult proof or cult savvy. We're born susceptible. Like, we're born as babies, like totally undefended. We learn to defend ourselves, but sometimes it's possible to be brought up inside of a cult and not even realize it. And cults are alive and well today. It's something I'm learning. And like something this documentary said is that, well, often cults will prey upon people or really kind of try to get them to join up and indoctrinate them when they're at a crossroads in their life, when they're at a point in their life where it's like they're vulnerable and they're not satisfied with the way that things have been going in their lives, whatever the details might be, and therefore they're more susceptible to influence. And and interestingly enough, like for me, like that is like I'll often talk about how like that is an indication that you're ready for a kind of initiation, being in that crossroads. And that's an indigenous concept too. Like, that's not just like something I pulled out of thin air. Like, this is, like when a child goes through puberty, in my estimation, that is a time in which the culture can show up to hold them in a rite of passage, and that is a crossroads for them. And it's so important to me that whatever I offer, whatever door I hold open for another person, there is no coercion. It is consensual. It is like their choice that's coming through. And in modern culture, in my estimation, we're not trained to be aware of this enough. But we're also not trained to have our ability to recognize what is my clear yes and no, what is my clear choice inside of me. Like, what even is that? Like, it's very common to instead go along with the group and have that be peer pressure to be the thing that's we're attuned to. And I'm interested in living in a culture where as many people as possible are centered in their own authority, and and there's no limit to the importance of that. It's not a Okay, so I said a lot there. How's that? Or what's that?
Yeah.
Where do you want to go?
Thank you. I'm curious. There's a lots of places to go here. I found an interesting part link up when you're speaking of. It seems like like you mentioned, this crossroads piece, like a lot of the, I think there's a very natural so mechanics, qualities, patterns of human life that this documentary highlighted were exploited by cult leaders and cults. And so there's something about separating out what are these natural human patterns that in the case of culture being manipulated, but in the hands or in the culture of that's more wise, can turn it into a huge blessing to society and the planet, and other beings. So there's something about making the distinction about what makes a cult compared to a generative culture. And I remember them saying at the start of the film, like there's three main things that identify a cult. One is there's a charismatic leader. Two, there's some quality of mind control going on, which leads to the third one, which is exploitation, either sexual or financial or social. So one thing I think there is like, how do we make sure these three things are avoided? Like, and at the same time, it's like there's something maybe about a charismatic leader who can draw people towards a deeper generative culture. But at what point does mind control come in, and what point does exploitation come in? So that gets me curious.
Just to speak to that a little bit more, I took notes on that particular part. So like I got the wording precisely what they said. So the first one is so a characteristic of the cult is it's like a group social movement led by a charismatic leader who demands to be revered as godlike. But I will say, like, I don't think that it has to be like an explicit demand. I think it can be like the way that they hold themselves, sort of others follow them, and there's like a kind of they all want this person's attention, and they'll sort of self-police one another. But okay, and the second one is it has an indoctrination program of thought reform or mind control. And then same exploitation, sexual or financial. And then the last thing is it becomes a cult when manipulation becomes destructive, and often like they are these leaders or the participants within the cult. They are making these appeals to social justice that sort of are kind of undeniable, and really they appeal to people's hearts, people's better judgments, but it comes with all this other stuff, all this other sort of the manipulative kind of thought programming. And I fear I don't think that we have to become like impotent as people who are interested in creating something different. And I think that it's always useful to like self-question, like what am I doing? Am I still on track? Am I still following my principles? Is this still ethical? Because I mean, one fear I have is like the seductiveness of power, the seductiveness of like if I show up in my gifts, I'm able to hold space for people to process their feelings or to gain some sense of empowerment within themselves. It's not uncommon that can seduce people into taking on some, like, unconsciously becoming manipulative.
Yeah, it's curious to me within that, and this is what I've tracked coming in contact with information about cults over the years, is although the leader may be really advanced in some domain of intelligence, maybe they're deeply spiritually be intelligence, for instance, often there's this sort of unacknowledged shadow side, which as power grows and is gained, if it's not dealt with, that seems to lead to the exploitation. So, these cult leaders who are sleeping with many of their very young female followers, for instance, or exploiting millions of dollars out of their followers, seems to be rooted in the shadows. And it's like we can be highly spiritually intelligent but lacking the ability to do shadow work. So I think there's a distinction there of like looking to the ones who are leaders. And this has happened to me in the past also. I had a very charismatic teacher who I kind of fell under the spell of and was having great spiritual gains, but realized that she had not dealt with some of this like deep background trauma of her life, which ultimately led to the dissolution of our relationship and many of the relationships she had with her students. And that also speaks to me as someone who's trying to do this in a small way, and some of my peers who are cultural creatives and leaders in their fields, of being curious, are they doing their shadow work? Like, do they have a good therapist? Are they like what processes or practices or communities are they in that are helping them unpack the things they can't see about themselves, that may be destructive and manipulative, which seems to almost always be rooted in trauma of some sort. And in the case of these like larger cults with extremely charismatic leaders, it seems to be some sort of sociopathic narcissism, that the extent of their power and charismatic attractiveness is somehow rooted in their massive sense of unworthiness. All right, that's a bit of interpretation from my side.
Yeah, thank you. There's what I've noticed with people who I've met who displayed a lot of sort of controlling, narcissistic personality. I don't know, the qualities. What I noticed at first is that like there was a time in my life where I wanted their approval, I wanted their attention, even if they triggered me. Like I get like super pissed off, but like, well, part of my nature or my is that, like I was raised to be a nice guy. So I mean I'm less conflict avoidant now, but my strategy for dealing with this kind of person was to try to get them to like me. Try to so I would metaphorically I don't know what you're doing there. It's creating some sort of scratching sound. I think maybe your microphone is just rubbing up against your. But I would metaphorically like bow my head to them or like try to like get out of their way or try to be nice to them or something like that. And it's kind of bizarre looking back that was my response, but I didn't have the ability to get angry and say what was on my mind or say no, I'm not okay with that kind of behavior. And so and back then I thought like my own self-talk was pretty destructive, where I would jump to the conclusion that whatever was happening is my fault. Like really denigrating self-talk, even if like looking back on it, it's just like no, it's clear that they and now I can look back on it, like oh, I can see the trauma that they can't see in themselves. I can see how I allowed myself to get caught in that web. That and yeah, like, so there's this question of like, well, what is the need in them that they're trying to meet? Like how is it that a person like that can get be so willing to accept other people's power? What does that feed in them? And yeah, I've come to the painful realization that it appears that there simply are some people who can't be are so sociopathic or psychopathic, or like that can't be undone in them. They can't be, and trying to save them naively can actually really be harmful to you.
Yeah, totally. So which brings to the question of like how to engage with that. And actually reflecting now as you speak about this, I've like watched growth of this in your own life. I remember about 10 years ago, there was a man who I would judge as narcissistic and manipulative, who's involved with a partner of yours. And I remember you maybe had this more bowing down approach that you mentioned earlier, and like giving power over to this person. And I remember you suffering a lot, and kind of there being a lot of suffering around that particular situation. This is my projection and judgment. But then if we fast forward to just a few years ago, I remember we were at an event and there's somebody who was very much in their own thing. They're also intoxicated. And I remember you drawing like extremely clear boundaries with this person, and noticing how that like created a lot of safety around you in the space. So contrasting those two experiences of being like when Scott gives his power over to somebody who's manipulative and out of line, the sort of whole field around him gets sucked into more negativity, but where he draws clear boundaries around what's not okay in the darkness of others and creates space around that, it creates a lot of safety around you. Or my experience of that was a lot more safety. Your headphones are muted, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, for that reflection. And I realized that for me at that time, like anger was a taboo. Speaking directly like to somebody else who I felt angry at and actually voicing that was a taboo for me. And it makes a lot of sense that to me now that, okay, so in a cult, maybe it's just that it's more organized. It is that same dynamic but more organized. And some people are allowed within the group are allowed to express anger or express boundaries or have in ways in which other members are limited from that. So I would say that that is one of the things that I look for in a group that I might join, or in a friendship or a dynamic or something. It's like, is there some sort of dynamic where speaking in certain ways is held as taboo? I mean, well, one of the things I really appreciate about possibility management is that, which is, yeah, what I'm involved in, is that it's a culture of where feedback is allowed, like, and in any direction for whatever, and it's like I'm interested in being part of a community that can admit to itself if it's becoming cultish and tear itself down and rebuild. The same people get like and that's very painful. I think it's very painful for anybody who has a thing. It's very painful for me to like start something, community, a project, anything, and then like admit to myself, oh, it's not working in some way, and then tear it back down, itself back down. Like I wouldn't be surprised if like a lot of the people in cults, including the leaders, like are actually believe that what they're doing is right, and like so. And I
agree.
Yeah, and I'm clear right now. I'm like, oh man, for possibility management. Now I'm like, okay, it's just becoming this foundational thing for me. Anytime that somebody comes into one of my spaces that I'm holding, I'm like I want to get it across to them. Like, research cults for yourself, like cult proof yourself, or like, get prepared to ask all the questions that you have, that are you might think are taboo or something. If you have feelings, it's like honor your feelings, like fear of, and let's have that as thoroughly as possible, and then see what happens after, and never leave that question, never leave that conversation, because ultimately everyone benefits in the long term more from keeping your heads up and out of the sand.
Cool. Yeah, that seems so essential to have on board. And kind of what I'm intrigued by, and one part I was intrigued by in this movie was they sort of like listed the 7 steps or 8 steps it takes to indoctrinate people into a cult. And I was kind of intrigued how the first 3 like actually seemed quite innocent and like almost like there's a sort of like essentialness there to any sort of cultural creation movement. It's something like, someone's at a crossroads, they realize that the life they're living right now is missing something, or something needs to change. There's some sort of internal crisis. And then they get introduced to some way of being that's sort of better, like has some of the essence or quality that was lacking in their old life. And then they get welcomed into a group or a culture where they get to embody that and live that and integrate it into community. And all these things, I'm like, well, this is great. This is actually a sort of really healthy base for cultural creation. And then it seems to deviate down a potentially darker path, or something about like the leader has some sort of ultimate power. There's peer pressure to always keep conforming to the social norms. There's more manipulation that starts happening. So it makes sense to me what you're just talking about, of like this consistent critical thinking and questioning throughout, that those first 3 stages, along with critical thinking and support of each person's autonomy and their own capacity to make their own choices and decisions always, and bring in more information from outside the culture that's created. Feels really, these are important tools as a cultural creative that maybe we can learn from cults, but also learn about the dark sides and where it starts to go negative.
Yeah, and when I'm listening to this audiobook by Steven Hassan, like literally just download it, listen to the first couple chapters, combating cult mind control. It's really beautiful the way he intros it, because he's it's clearly designed to be a very respectful offering to those who've been indoctrinated, where he's like not putting pressure on. He's like, just know this is a safe space. This book is considered like, and man, like what it actually takes to create a safe space. I mean, that should never end as a conversation, like a really authentic,
Mm.
safe space. Like for humans, like we've got such huge shadows, we've got such huge unconscious patterns. All of us have these parts of us that we might not like to admit. It's painful to admit, but want to. Well, there's no rule to it. I won't like blanket everyone as having a particular tendency, but it takes a lot to become somebody who can hold a authentically safe space. And I think I don't think anyone gets to a point where they make no mistakes. And but one of the things he said in the intro of this book was like, you might find as you're reading this that you'll discover that, oh, I've been a part of a cult. Shit. Like, or you might read it and be like, oh, great. Like, I'm not part of a cult. I had some worries that maybe I am part of a cult. But no, actually, I'm confirmed. Like, they don't do these things. And it is for something ultimately beneficial. And there's something that really relaxed in me as I was listening to it. So like there, it's so clear to me, it's so important to me that I want there to be no kind of a limit to how long a person takes to consider and ask deep questions. This world already has so much pressure. Like, there's already so much pressure just living in the world as a human. I think, like, if anything is going to be created that's an alternative to modern culture, like, man, let it be a real sanctuary. And let it not be in like in it at war with modern culture. Like, let it feed back in. Let it be a space of respite for all humanity, and let's ask the tough questions along the way so it actually stays that way and benefit a lot of people.
What do you think the relationship between asking tough questions and safety is? You know, tough questions seems like a challenging doorway. You know, it's a tough place to enter in order to get to safe space. Why is that important?
Well, you know, I've been with certain mentors who, when I've asked them really tough questions, they get like offended, and it shows in a way it shows their humanness. Like, it's tough to be asked tough questions. It's tough to like receive feedback sometimes, but you know, there's a difference between talking to somebody, offering them feedback, and then they don't accept the feedback, they don't like the question, they shut down the conversation, and it's clear they're defending something. They're defending a kind of structure they have built inside themselves, or some kind of. So comparing that with other mentors I've been with, like, it's clear they have no limits to the depths to which they're willing to hold space for a person's journey of that kind of inquiry. They're not trying to hold them to a program. They're not trying to push them down a particular path. Like trees, it's not like let's not, as we're growing little baby saplings, like sort of restrict all the branches to grow particularly in this direction. So they're all like exactly like, no, they're like, it reaches out, it reaches for the sun as it's like sensing it needs to. There's an intuitive unfolding process that humans are designed to there's the possibility of becoming something that, like, becoming genius, becoming our own unique kind of style of genius, and to live our gifts in ways that nobody else can tell us. Like, there's a lot that we can learn from other people's influence, but I think there's just something so precious about that intuitive growth within.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So sort of what I'm hearing is like the tough questions are actually a sort of probing into the integrity of a teacher or a mentor or a technique. I even saw it like you're using this branch metaphor, and it's like the tough questions are like this sort of reaching out towards the sun. And in the process, you'll understand if you're being bound and restricted, or if you have the invitation to go deeper and deeper and farther towards the light.
Yeah, and I mean the metaphor maybe breaks down a bit with the trees, because like who is the tree being mentored by? I don't know, but like, it's there. I want people listening to this. I want you to hear that like your inner authority matters, and also like there's a lot of richness in life that can come from finding a mentor that you trust. You know, you can kind of point out possibilities for your like offer you possible. Hey, have you considered growing this direction? Like it might even, it's not necessarily that they're influence. Like Randy Jones, who's one of my long-term mentors, who I want to have on the podcast here. Like consistently, I find him like pointing out things to me in myself I didn't realize that I love about myself. I didn't realize it was so beautiful, and it's like, oh man, I am great at that, but I haven't been saying that enough to myself. And then I realized, oh, I can grow in that way. I can like, yeah. And I really gotta pee. So we better end this call. We're also at time anyways. But I'm at the outer limit of how far I can grow in this direction. but I hope we can continue this. You're getting the raw.
See you next week.
You're getting the raw cut, listeners. But let us know. let us know how you like it. If you like this, or if you don't like it. If you got tough questions or whatever. And that Explained documentary is free on Netflix. So you can watch that. Just look up Explained Cults. It's free.
On
That's
YouTube.
right. It's free on YouTube. It's free on YouTube, or you can watch it. All right. That's it.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Still recording.